The classroom's awkward silence after Zilthak's assessment spoke volumes. You could practically hear the recalculations happening in real time across multiple species' thought processes. When the galaxy's foremost conflict theorist declares military resistance mathematically inadvisable, people tend to listen. That crystalline student's question about human invincibility hung in the air long after the professor's response, the implications settling like dust after an explosion. Everyone present understood they'd just received not just an academic lesson, but a survival guide. The protective hegemony that emerged from this realization was both practical and deeply paradoxical. Officials eventually agreed to Danny's open publication demands, but with conditions that reflected galactic realities. They provided a fully equipped research laboratory, advanced fabrication facilities, and assigned him a team of the galaxy's leading xenobiologists. The security detail expanded to include marine escorts, enhanced monitoring of the research facility, and orbital defense platforms positioned to safeguard against potential threats. This created the unusual situation where open knowledge required military protection to prevent suppression. The arrangement acknowledged that humanity's generosity needed safeguarding from species that might want to weaponize the technology or prevent its distribution. Orbital patrol squadrons circled the research station not to restrict access, but to ensure nobody else could. It was like building a fortress around a public library. The knowledge remained available to everyone, but the building itself became impregnable. Danny's project became the test case for this new collaborative model. The protective hegemony concept accepted human leadership precisely because it made everyone better off. Species that once hesitated to work with humans now sought their problem-solving abilities, recognizing that the benefits outweighed the discomfort. The same creativity that terrified in combat situations produced miraculous solutions in medicine, engineering, and crisis management. The economic implications alone justified the security investment. Danny's medical scanner technology promised to save millions of lives across dozens of species, with projected economic impact reaching trillions of credits. Hospital ships could treat mixed populations without carrying dozens of specialized devices. Emergency responders could provide immediate care to unfamiliar species without compatibility errors. The humanitarian benefits were too significant to ignore, even for the most cautious officials. This approach represented a fundamental shift in galactic thinking. Instead of resisting human influence, the galaxy learned to channel it productively. The protective hegemony worked because it acknowledged reality. Humanity's problem-solving ability created value that exceeded the risks of their unpredictability. Their military superiority ensured that solutions couldn't be easily suppressed by less altruistic species. The arrangement demonstrated that sometimes being conquered by a superior force could actually improve conditions for everyone involved. Human leadership came with measurable benefits in infrastructure, security, and quality of life. Species that accepted this reality prospered. Those that resisted became case studies in statistical improbability. The galaxy was learning to appreciate the difference between dangerous enemies and dangerous friends. Humanity fell squarely into the second category. Their capabilities were terrifying, but their applications were increasingly beneficial. The protective hegemony model ensured those benefits reached everyone, while minimizing the risks. It was governance through practical mathematics rather than ideology, and it worked because the numbers didn't lie. Then came the final irony in Danny's transformation, the kind of symmetry that makes galactic historians both delighted and slightly uncomfortable. The Galactic Council needed to appoint a military liaison for Danny's research project, someone who could provide security oversight while understanding the technology's strategic implications. The assignment went to Colonel Alexander Fletcher, recently promoted and conveniently available after concluding his latest deployment. The Warlord of Proxima Centauri would now personally protect his son's medical research. This wasn't just administrative convenience. The appointment symbolized the complete fusion of humanity's military and scientific identities in galactic perception. Father and son now represented the two faces of human capability that had so confounded the galaxy. Destructive power and creative healing existing in the same bloodline. Colonel Fletcher brought his tactical experience to safeguard technology that could save millions, his combat expertise now serving peaceful innovation rather than military objectives. The galaxy watched this development with nervous fascination. The Fletchers became the first family of human-galactic relations, their personal dynamics now carrying implications for interspecies politics and security protocols. Diplomatic channels monitored their interactions like vital intelligence, looking for clues about human behavior patterns. Security analysts studied how military and scientific priorities balanced within their unusual partnership. Danny's academic success suddenly mattered far beyond graduation requirements. His research projects now received security classifications previously reserved for military operations. University administrators found themselves coordinating with defense officials about lab access protocols. The Marine detail outside his dorm answered to his father's command structure, creating a seamless transition between academic and military oversight. The Colonel's presence changed everything about the research environment. Where university security had been about protection, his approach was about prevention. He implemented protocols designed to anticipate threats rather than respond to them. Access controls became more sophisticated, data encryption more robust, physical security more comprehensive. The research facility started resembling a military installation more than an academic lab. Yet the most remarkable transformation was in Colonel Fletcher himself. The feared tactical architect of Proxima Centauri now spent his days reviewing medical research protocols and discussing ethical implications of open-source technology. He attended scientific briefings with the same intensity he once reserved for combat simulations, asking detailed questions about medical applications and safety standards. The Warlord was learning to think like a scientist. This shift demonstrated something profound about human adaptability. The same mind that could dismantle an enemy fleet could also protect life-saving innovation. The Colonel's tactical creativity now served a completely different purpose, ensuring that knowledge remained freely available rather than restricted. He was solving the problem of how to keep something open, rather than how to keep something secure. The galaxy observed this transformation with cautious optimism. If humanity's most feared military mind could embrace open collaboration, perhaps their entire species was capable of similar evolution. The protective hegemony model gained credibility, as others recognized that human capabilities could serve constructive purposes when properly channeled. Danny continued his work with renewed determination, now understanding that his research represented more than academic achievement. Each breakthrough demonstrated that humanity's problem-solving ability could heal as effectively as it could destroy. His father's presence served as both protection and reminder of where they came from and what they might become. The research progressed faster under military oversight, ironically enough. The Colonel's logistical experience streamlined operations. His strategic thinking identified efficiencies. His authority resolved bureaucratic obstacles. The same skills that made him effective in combat made him invaluable in research management. Human capabilities, it turned out, were remarkably transferable across domains. This father-son partnership became a living symbol of humanity's dual nature. They represented the balance between power and responsibility, innovation and ethics, destruction and creation. The galaxy learned that human potential wasn't fixed. It could be directed toward different ends based on circumstances and choices. The feared warlord protecting peaceful research demonstrated that protection and generosity could indeed coexist, and that sometimes the most dangerous capabilities could serve the most beneficial purposes. You know what really terrified the galaxy's strategic planners? The raw numbers. Once the Galactic Council compiled the data from every engagement since humanity's integration, the statistics painted a picture that defied conventional military understanding. The pattern wasn't just impressive, it was statistically improbable to the point of being alarming. They'd fought 17 documented conflicts under observation, and their performance metrics looked like someone had edited the data to make a point. In 12 of those engagements, human forces were significantly outnumbered. We're not talking slight disadvantages. Some engagements showed odds that should have been mathematically insurmountable, according to standard fleet combat models. 4-to-1 disadvantages weren't uncommon. 5-to-1 situations occurred with disturbing frequency, yet they achieved decisive victories every single time. The numbers didn't show narrow wins or Pyrrhic victories. They showed clear, unambiguous successes against forces that should have overwhelmed them. The casualty ratios were even more concerning. The average across all engagements showed 1 human loss for every 47 enemy casualties. That's not a margin of victory. That's a statistical anomaly that makes actuaries question their life choices. In space combat, where even victories typically cost both sides dearly, humanity's losses were consistently minimal compared to their opponents. It suggested an efficiency that bordered on predictability, this consistent ability to achieve objectives while minimizing their own exposure. Then there was the engagement duration. Space battles among established galactic powers typically last for days, sometimes weeks, as fleets maneuver for position and test defenses. Human engagements averaged 4 hours and 37 minutes. They didn't waste time with positioning games or probing attacks. They identified the objective, executed their solution, and concluded the matter with brutal efficiency. It was like watching someone solve a complex equation while everyone else was still sharpening their pencils. These numbers completely defied conventional force calculus models. Military analysts spent months trying to create predictive models that could account for human performance. Every time they thought they'd identified a pattern, the next engagement would break it. Humans didn't follow the established rules of combat mathematics. Their effectiveness seemed to increase when faced with superior numbers, their creativity flourishing under constraints that would paralyze other forces. The struggle to predict human behavior became the galaxy's foremost military headache. Strategic planners couldn't anticipate their moves because humans didn't operate according to recognizable patterns. They might retreat from a weak opponent to pursue some secondary objective, or attack a stronger force without apparent concern for the odds. Their decision-making seemed chaotic until after the fact, when the results demonstrated a logic that was perfectly clear in retrospect but impossible to foresee. The resolution became painfully obvious to anyone studying the data. Humanity's statistical performance made them strategically unpredictable in the most dangerous way possible. You couldn't model them, couldn't anticipate their actions, couldn't even reliably predict when they'd consider a situation worth fighting over. This uncertainty created a standing policy of avoidance. If you couldn't predict how humans would respond to provocation, the only safe option was avoiding provocation entirely. The numbers didn't just tell a story of military effectiveness. They told a story of a species that had redefined the very mathematics of conflict. You know what really demonstrates human problem-solving under pressure? The Vega 7 incident. Captain Elizabeth Hawthorne's frigate was running routine patrol when the distress call came through. Standard procedure would have been to establish perimeter surveillance and wait for backup. 400 scientists would have been dead before reinforcements arrived. Hawthorne faced a single frigate against a much larger hegemony raider force that had already occupied the research station. The raiders weren't just holding scientists hostage, they'd activated the station's defense systems and established firing positions covering all standard approach vectors. Conventional tactics called for siege operations or negotiation. Humans, of course, don't do conventional. Hawthorne looked at her emergency supply pods and saw something else. Entirely improvised explosive devices waiting to happen. She had her crew empty the pods and fill them with whatever reactive compounds they had available, cleaning solvents, fuel additives, even some medical supplies that become unstable under certain conditions. It was the kind of improvisation that violates every safety regulation in the Galactic Code. Then she didn't aim at the raiders themselves. That would have been expected. She targeted the station's external power regulators and defense control nodes. The resulting explosions disabled weapons and primary systems without breaching inhabited sections. It was like performing surgery with demolition charges. The approach shouldn't work, but somehow did when humans tried it. The raiders were still reacting to the sudden system failures when Hawthorne's Marine contingent docked and began extraction procedures. They moved with that practiced efficiency humans display when they've decided a problem needs solving immediately. The entire operation lasted 27 minutes from first detonation to final extraction. Every scientist was recovered alive. The raider force suffered total casualties or capture without a single human or researcher lost. It wasn't a battle in the conventional sense. It was a solution implemented with brutal efficiency. The hegemony never understood what was happening, because they were waiting for a military engagement while the humans were solving an extraction problem. This incident became the definitive example of human improvisation, saving lives where conventional methods would have failed. They hadn't won through superior firepower or numbers. They'd won by redefining what victory meant. Where other species saw an unwinnable combat scenario, humans saw a rescue operation with some obstacles to circumvent. Their solution was messy, unorthodox, and violated half a dozen safety protocols, but it worked perfectly. The galaxy's military analysts spent months studying the Vega 7 incident. They ran simulations, conducted after-action reviews, tried to replicate the results. Every time they followed standard protocols, they got standard failures. Only when they attempted to mimic human improvisation did they achieve similar outcomes, though never with the same flawless execution. There's a difference between theoretical creativity and actually jettisoning explosive supply pods at an occupied space station based on a calculated risk. This incident shifted the galactic perception of humanity from dangerously unpredictable to terrifyingly effective. The same qualities that made them worrying as adversaries made them invaluable as allies. Suddenly, species that had been keeping their distance started wondering if having humans on your side was better than following centuries of proven tactical doctrine. The Vega 7 miracle demonstrated that sometimes the most dangerous solution is also the only one that actually works when conventional methods have already failed. You know what happens when a species consistently demonstrates they can solve problems nobody else can? The Galactic Council finally had to face reality after Vega 7. They'd spent decades treating humanity like dangerous curiosities that needed careful containment protocols. The incident forced a complete strategic reevaluation, not just of human capabilities, but of how the galaxy should interact with them. Captain Hawthorne's promotion to Admiral wasn't just a reward for saving lives. It was a symbolic shift in how the establishment viewed human leadership. Where before they'd been given limited authority and strict oversight, now they were handed expanded operational freedom and resources. The Terran Deep Space Fleet expansion accelerated dramatically, with new vessel classes entering service that embodied human design philosophy. These weren't just ships, they were floating statements of intent. The Dreadnought-class vessels became the physical manifestation of this new approach. Unlike traditional warships that balanced combat capability with diplomatic functions and crew comfort, these things were all business. Minimal living quarters, maximum weaponization, and multi-role adaptivity that let them shift from reconnaissance to combat to disaster response within hours. They looked like someone had taken 3 different specialist vessels and compressed them into one brutally efficient package. This hardware shift reflected the larger policy change sweeping through galactic institutions. The old containment strategy, keeping humans at arm's length while studying them, was replaced by active collaboration. Military resistance was now officially classified as inherently dangerous, based on statistical probability, rather than subjective assessment. The numbers didn't lie. Engagement with human forces typically ended badly for whoever initiated it. The official policy became strikingly simple: avoid confrontation with humans whenever possible. If conflict became unavoidable, the recommended protocol was immediate unconditional surrender followed by generous reparations offers. It wasn't about cowardice, it was about mathematical probability. The data showed that prolonged resistance only improved human combat effectiveness while increasing your own losses. Better to end things quickly and negotiate from whatever position remained. This pragmatic approach recognized that humanity's problem-solving ability benefited everyone when properly channeled. The same creativity that made them terrifying opponents made them invaluable allies. Species that had once hidden from human vessels now requested their assistance with engineering crises, medical emergencies, and diplomatic deadlocks. The calculus had shifted from fear to utility. If you couldn't defeat them, you might as well benefit from them. The resolution was both simple and profound. The galaxy had learned that sometimes the smartest strategic move is recognizing when you're outmatched. Humanity's consistent performance across 17 engagements created a policy reality where avoidance wasn't defeat, it was just good mathematics. The protective hegemony wasn't born from friendship or idealism. It was born from cold, hard data that said working with humans was safer and more productive than working against them. Sometimes the most sophisticated strategy is knowing when to stop strategizing and start collaborating. You know how classrooms usually have that low hum of whispered conversations? Shuffling feet, the general background noise of academic engagement? After Professor Ziltak finished his analysis of the Vega 7 incident, the lecture hall went so quiet you could hear the ventilation system cycling. Every student seemed to be processing the same uncomfortable realization simultaneously. They were studying a species that appeared to operate outside conventional military logic. Then, a crystalline student near the front raised a trembling appendage, their crystalline structure catching the light nervously. The question hung in the air between them, simple and devastating in its implications. Does this mean humans are effectively invincible in combat situations? You could feel the collective intake of breath throughout the room. It was the question everyone had been thinking, but nobody had dared to ask aloud. The logical endpoint of an hour spent analyzing engagements where humans consistently overcame impossible odds. Professor Zilthak considered for a long moment, his multiple hands resting calmly on the lectern. When he finally spoke, his dry voice carried with the weight of finalized calculations. I would assess the likelihood of successful military action against human forces as inadvisable. The words landed with deliberate precision, each syllable measured and clear. He paused again, letting that assessment settle over the room before continuing. And if such action were attempted anyway, I would recommend immediate unconditional surrender. He wasn't finished. The professor added that such surrender should include sincere apologies and possibly tribute payments before hostilities even began. He framed it not as cowardice but as practical mathematics. Why waste resources and lives on an engagement where the outcome was statistically predetermined? The assessment was delivered with the same detached academic tone he'd used to discuss ancient battles, which somehow made it more impactful. This wasn't emotional speculation. This was analytical conclusion. The classroom's silence became profound. This wasn't the quiet of boredom or disinterest. It was the silence of fundamental assumptions being rearranged. The academic analysis they'd been following for weeks had suddenly become a practical survival guide. Students exchanged glances, antennae drooping, scales shifting color nervously. The crystalline who'd asked the question seemed to shrink slightly, their crystalline structure dimming as if trying to become less visible. What made the moment particularly uncomfortable was the realization that this wasn't abstract theory anymore. Danny Fletcher sat among them. The living embodiment of everything they'd just been told was militarily unconquerable. The academic discussion about human capabilities had suddenly become personal, immediate, and uncomfortably relevant to their daily lives. They weren't just learning about human military effectiveness, they were learning how to coexist with it. The resolution settled over the room like a physical weight. The galaxy's foremost conflict theorist had officially declared that active military resistance against humanity was inherently dangerous based on statistical probability rather than subjective opinion. This shifted the strategic calculus from theoretical discussion to practical reality. The classroom full of future diplomats, officers, and policymakers now understood that dealing with humans required a fundamentally different approach than dealing with any other species. The bell signaling the end of lecture sounded unusually loud in the continued silence. Nobody moved immediately. Students remained in their seats, processing the implications of what they'd just heard. The standard academic exercise had transformed into something far more significant, a lesson in galactic realpolitik that would influence their careers for decades to come. They'd arrived expecting to learn about conflict theory, and left understanding why some conflicts were better avoided entirely. Danny's scanner turned out to be just the opening act. You know how most species treat scientific discoveries like precious resources to be hoarded and traded? Humans treated theirs like party invitations. They wanted everyone to come. That open-source medical breakthrough sparked something across the galaxy. This sudden realization that maybe sharing knowledge didn't mean losing advantage. It might actually create new advantages nobody had considered before. Human scientists started collaborating openly on research that would have been proprietary state secrets for any other species. They formed cross-species teams working on quantum entanglement communications, archaeological digs on dead worlds, environmental restoration projects for planets suffering ecological collapse. The human renaissance wasn't just a cultural movement, it was a fundamental rewiring of how galactic science operated. They treated knowledge like oxygen instead of gold, something that became more valuable the more you shared it. The medical advances alone transformed healthcare across hundreds of worlds. Diseases that had plagued species for generations suddenly became treatable with adapted human technology. Their scanners identified biological markers nobody had thought to look for, leading to treatments for conditions everyone had considered untreatable. Hospital ships could now service mixed populations without carrying dozens of specialized devices. Emergency medics could treat unfamiliar species without worrying about compatibility errors. The mortality rates dropped so dramatically that some civilizations experienced population booms for the first time in centuries. Infrastructure projects based on human engineering principles solved energy and transportation crises that had seemed permanent. They looked at orbital elevator failures not as inevitable structural limitations, but as engineering puzzles missing the right solution. Their teams fixed quantum communication networks that had been unstable for decades, using approaches that violated standard protocols but produced perfect results. They treated planetary-scale problems like weekend renovation projects, messy, but ultimately solvable with the right approach. The same creative problem-solving that had revolutionized warfare was now revolutionizing quality of life across the galaxy. That intensity humans brought to combat situations, the refusal to accept that any problem was truly unsolvable, turned out to be equally effective when applied to peaceful endeavors. They approached reactor maintenance with the same focus they brought to fleet maneuvers, treated agricultural crises with the same urgency as tactical emergencies. Their mindset didn't distinguish between types of problems, only between solved and unsolved, which brings us to the galaxy's uncomfortable conclusion about humanity. A crystalline philosopher offered the definitive assessment that pretty much sums up everyone's mixed feelings. You know that moment when you realize you're being dominated by someone who genuinely wants what's best for you? That's where we found ourselves. The assessment was simple. We have found ourselves in the unprecedented situation of being conquered by a species that insists on making us better off. It's the kind of statement that makes you check your translation device twice. This captured the essential paradox of human nature. That terrifying capability paired with surprisingly generous application. Humans approach problems with the same intensity, whether they're fixing a reactor core or dismantling an enemy fleet. Their creativity doesn't distinguish between destructive and constructive applications, it just solves. The same mind that designs orbital bombardment patterns might later design irrigation systems, using the same problem-solving algorithms for both tasks. There's no moral weighting in their process, just efficiency metrics. This makes them simultaneously the galaxy's greatest threat and its most valuable asset. You're never quite sure whether you're getting a miracle cure or a strategic nightmare when humans get involved. Their medical breakthroughs could save millions while their tactical innovations could defeat entire fleets, often using similar underlying principles. The scanner that identifies biological markers could theoretically identify vulnerabilities. The encryption that protects medical data could secure military communications. Everything has dual applications because humans don't think in categories, they think in solutions. The Good Psychopaths label acknowledges this dual nature perfectly. It's not that humans lack empathy. They demonstrate plenty of concern for others' well-being. It's that their problem-solving operates independently of emotional considerations. They'll solve your famine with the same detached intensity they'd use to plan your defeat. The label stuck because it captures both the admiration and the unease everyone feels. They're beneficial, certainly, but in a way that keeps you slightly on edge. The galaxy has learned to accept humanity's unsettling nature because the results consistently justify the anxiety. Every time someone worries about human influence, they look at the medical advances, the infrastructure improvements, the solved crises that had persisted for generations. The protective hegemony model works because it channels that terrifying capability toward constructive ends. Humans get to solve problems, everyone else gets the benefits, and the military superiority ensures nobody disrupts the arrangement. Sometimes the most dangerous friends are the most valuable ones. Humanity's unpredictability makes them worrying companions, but their effectiveness makes them indispensable allies. The galaxy has embraced this paradox because the alternative, trying to resist or contain them, has been mathematically proven to end poorly. Better to be uncomfortably prosperous than comfortably obsolete. The arrangement acknowledges that progress sometimes requires accepting help from those who could also cause significant damage if they chose to. This dynamic has created a new normal where security and generosity coexist through careful balancing. Human military strength protects human innovations, ensuring that their problem-solving benefits everyone rather than being suppressed or weaponized. The same ships that could defeat fleets now safeguard research stations. The same tactical minds that planned engagements now optimize supply chains. It's all the same capability, just directed differently. The galaxy has essentially decided that being conquered by humans is preferable to independence, because their version of dominance includes making everyone better off. It's the kind of pragmatic acceptance that comes from watching 17 engagements end the same way. And countless crises get solved through unconventional thinking. Sometimes the most dangerous discovery isn't a threat. It's a better way of doing things delivered by someone who could also destroy you if they wanted to. The anxiety never completely disappears, but the results make it worth tolerating. Meanwhile, our student was learning about unintended consequences the hard way. Danny's medical scanner design spread across 3 sectors within months, not through marketing campaigns or corporate partnerships, but through sheer practical necessity. Hospital ships adopted it first, recognizing how it could treat mixed-species crews without the usual equipment changes. Emergency response teams followed suit, then planetary health systems. Before anyone realized what was happening, the technology had become standard equipment in hundreds of medical facilities. He became known as the most feared name in 3 sectors, which was impressive considering he'd never fired a weapon in anger. The fear wasn't about destruction anymore, it was about disruption. His medical technology threatened entire industries built around proprietary diagnostic systems. It challenged political structures that relied on controlling medical access. It even unsettled military planners who saw how easily life-saving innovation could undo centuries of strategic advantage. Healing, it turned out, could be as destabilizing as warfare when applied on this scale. Species that had carefully avoided human contact now actively sought their medical expertise. Danny found himself advising governments on public health infrastructure while still trying to complete his xenobiology degree. Planetary leaders would request his consultation on implementing the scanner technology, then hesitate when they realized they were taking medical advice from someone who couldn't legally drink alcohol in most systems. The disconnect between his age and his influence became its own kind of diplomatic challenge. The Warlord's heir had become a different kind of leader entirely. Where his father solved problems through tactical superiority, Danny solved them through accessibility. His approach wasn't about defeating opponents, but making opposition irrelevant. The scanner technology didn't beat existing medical systems. It simply made them obsolete through superior functionality. This represented a fundamental shift in how humanity engaged with the galaxy, moving from force to facilitation. Yet the military protection detail remained, a constant reminder that peaceful innovation could be as threatening as any weapon. 2 Marines still accompanied him to lectures, their presence acknowledging that healing technology could disrupt power balances as effectively as combat technology. The orbital defense platforms around the research station weren't there to prevent attack, so much as to prevent suppression, ensuring that the knowledge remained available to everyone. His father's presence as military liaison served as daily reminder that human capabilities always carried multiple meanings. The same tactical mind that could dismantle fleets now optimized medical supply chains. The same security protocols that protected military secrets now safeguarded open research. The colonel's transition from combat commander to research protector demonstrated how human skills transferred across domains without losing effectiveness. Danny had accidentally demonstrated humanity's true power lay in redefining problems rather than simply solving them. The medical scanner didn't just improve diagnostic accuracy, it changed how the galaxy thought about cross-species medicine. It showed that solutions could come from unexpected places, that age and experience weren't prerequisites for innovation, that sometimes the student knew more than the masters. The economic impact reached trillions of credits as medical costs dropped and new treatment possibilities emerged. Previously fatal conditions became manageable, chronic illnesses became treatable, and emergency medicine transformed across species lines. The technology saved millions of lives while simultaneously disrupting economic models that had persisted for centuries. The student who wanted to heal had become more influential than any warlord precisely because he represented a different kind of power. His influence came not from the ability to destroy, but from the capacity to improve. The galaxy learned that humanity's most dangerous capability wasn't their military effectiveness. It was their unwillingness to accept that any problem was unsolvable, whether that problem involved enemy fleets or incompatible biology. This unexpected fame created its own paradox. The more successful his medical technology became, the more his military protection seemed necessary. The more lives he saved, the more he needed safeguarding from those who felt threatened by his success. It was the galactic version of having your cake and needing to defend it with orbital weapons simultaneously. So what does the galaxy actually think of humans now, 50 years after first contact? They've become the dominant force in interstellar affairs without firing a shot in conquest. The protective hegemony model that emerged isn't some temporary arrangement. It's the accepted framework for how interspecies governance works now. Everyone understands the basic equation: accept human leadership and enjoy unprecedented prosperity, or resist and become another statistical anomaly in their victory records. Human creativity has become the default solution for problems others consider insoluble. Resource scarcity that plagued civilizations for centuries gets solved in months. Diplomatic deadlocks that would have taken generations to resolve get untangled in weeks. The same problem-solving ability that terrified everyone in combat situations now provides security for collaborative progress across hundreds of worlds. Species that once hid from human vessels now actively request their crisis teams when local emergencies overwhelm their capabilities. The calculus became remarkably simple once everyone examined the data. Resistance isn't just strategically questionable, it's mathematically inadvisable according to every combat model. But more importantly, it's increasingly unnecessary given the measurable benefits of cooperation. Why fight humanity when their involvement guarantees improved infrastructure, advanced medical care, and economic growth? Their version of dominance comes with tangible improvements in quality of life that independence never provided. This acceptance represents the ultimate paradox of human integration. The galaxy has essentially decided that being gently conquered is preferable to maintaining full sovereignty. Human military superiority provides the security that enables open collaboration, ensuring that innovations reach everyone, rather than being restricted or suppressed. Their ships protect research stations, their tactical minds optimize supply chains, their problem-solving abilities address crises that would have devastated entire sectors. The case of the medical scanner technology demonstrated this perfectly. A student's project became standard equipment across 3 sectors because it solved a universal problem better than any proprietary system. Human generosity combined with their military effectiveness created a situation where everyone benefits from their dominance. They don't conquer through force. They conquer through making independence seem like the less attractive option. This doesn't mean the anxiety completely disappeared. Everyone remains aware that human capabilities could be directed differently if circumstances changed. The same creativity that solves medical crises could devise new weapons. The same logistical brilliance that optimizes supply chains could strangle them. But the protective hegemony model acknowledges this dual nature, while channeling it toward constructive ends. Human military strength safeguards human generosity, creating a balanced system where everyone progresses together. The galaxy has learned that sometimes the most dangerous discovery isn't a threat. It's a better way of doing things that makes previous methods obsolete. Humanity's problem-solving doesn't just provide solutions. It redefines what's possible, raising standards and expectations across all species. Their influence has created a new normal where progress happens faster, crises get resolved more completely, and quality of life improves consistently. This calculated acceptance reflects pragmatic wisdom rather than enthusiastic endorsement. Nobody throws parties celebrating human dominance, but everyone acknowledges the benefits. The arrangement works because it serves everyone's interest while respecting human nature. They get to solve problems, we get the solutions, and their military ensures nobody disrupts the process. It's governance through practical mathematics rather than ideology. And the numbers have never been more favorable. The galactic policy of siding with humanity immediately and without question isn't based on affection. It's based on results. Every engagement, every crisis, every innovation has demonstrated that human involvement improves outcomes. Their version of conquest doesn't involve subjugation. It involves elevation. They don't rule over others so much as they pull everyone upward, creating a rising tide that lifts all species. The anxiety remains, but the results justify it. Sometimes the most dangerous friends are the ones who make everything better. Which brings us back to Danny Fletcher, that 19-year-old student who just wanted to pass his xenobiology without his family history getting in the way. He completed his degree under circumstances nobody could have anticipated, with armed Marines still stationed outside his dorm, and diplomatic observers tracking his academic progress like it was military intelligence. His graduation ceremony wasn't the usual sleepy academic affair. It included official representatives from 17 different species, all watching intently as humanity's most famous student received his diploma. The medical scanner he'd developed as a class project now operated in hundreds of hospitals across 3 sectors, saving lives daily in emergency rooms and medical ships that served mixed species populations. What began as an undergraduate research project had become standard medical equipment, its adoption accelerated by the same unconventional thinking that characterized human problem-solving. The technology demonstrated that human innovation could heal as effectively as it could disrupt, creating tangible benefits that outweighed theoretical concerns. His father attended the ceremony not as the feared warlord of Proxima Centauri, but as a proud parent and official military liaison. Colonel Fletcher stood guard in dress uniform, his presence symbolizing the fusion of human military capability and scientific progress. The same tactical mind that had dismantled enemy fleets now protected medical research, demonstrating that human skills transferred seamlessly across domains. The galaxy watched this father-son dynamic with nervous fascination, recognizing that humanity's dual nature could serve both protection and healing simultaneously. The diplomatic observers represented species that had once avoided human contact, now actively engaging with humanity's rising influence. They watched hopefully but cautiously as Danny took the stage, understanding that human students might become anything: healers, warriors, or some combination that defied easy categorization. The only certainty was that they would solve problems in ways nobody anticipated, using approaches that violated conventions but produced results. This generation of human graduates represented both opportunity and uncertainty, their potential limited only by their creativity. Danny's story demonstrated that humanity's true legacy wasn't destruction, but creative solutions. The warlord's heir had become a healer, his medical technology saving more lives than his father's tactics had ever endangered. This transformation showed that human capabilities could be directed toward constructive ends when properly channeled. The galaxy was learning to appreciate the difference between fearing human potential and benefiting from it, between resisting their influence and collaborating with their problem-solving abilities. The protective hegemony model ensured that human innovation reached everyone while safeguarding against misuse. Military strength protected scientific progress, creating a balance between security and generosity. This arrangement acknowledged that humanity's unpredictable nature required careful management, but also offered unprecedented benefits. Species that once hesitated to work with humans now sought their problem-solving abilities, recognizing that the results justified the inherent uncertainty. Danny's graduation marked not an ending but a transition, from student to innovator, from symbol to practitioner. His future work would continue under the same unusual circumstances, with military protection enabling peaceful research. The galaxy would watch his career with continued interest, understanding that human graduates represented both opportunity and disruption. Their education didn't just teach them skills, it taught them to rethink problems entirely, to find solutions where others saw only obstacles. The ceremony concluded with the traditional presentation of diplomas, but everyone present understood this was more than academic recognition. It was acknowledgement that humanity's place in the galaxy had shifted from dangerous newcomers to indispensable partners. The anxiety never completely disappeared, but the results made it worth tolerating. Sometimes the most dangerous capabilities produced the most beneficial outcomes, and sometimes the warlord's heir became the healer who saved everyone. So the next time you see a human student struggling with textbooks or daydreaming in class, remember that the galaxy sees something else entirely. Humanity's true revolution wasn't their battlefield audacity, but their relentless redefining of what's possible through raw problem-solving. We remain watchful of their capabilities, while benefiting daily from their unconventional solutions. Perhaps we're more fortunate than we realize to have been discovered by humans rather than encountering a species less inclined toward improvement. Their peculiar blend of danger and generosity has given us progress where we expected conflict, solutions where we anticipated problems. You know how every species in the galaxy thinks humans are just aggressive toddlers with rocket launchers? Well, meet Danny Fletcher. He's a 19-year-old student trying to pass xenobiology, but the galaxy sees him as something else entirely, the heir to a warlord's legacy. And today, in Professor Zilthak's class, that reputation is about to catch up to him in the most humiliating way possible. You know how every new species gets that nice welcome packet with the engraved data crystal and a friendly ambassador to show them around? Humanity skipped that part entirely. The Galactic Council had spent millennia perfecting their integration protocols. This whole careful system for bringing civilizations into the fold, based on predictable technological and social development patterns. They knew how to handle species that achieved spaceflight through renewable energy or peaceful cooperation. Then humans showed up. They didn't arrive with careful diplomacy or scheduled introductions. They accidentally rerouted a major trade fleet because someone entered the wrong coordinates during what they called a test flight. Their first contact involved offering a warm beverage to a species that metabolizes refined metal, then trying to repair the resulting diplomatic incident with what looked like primitive hand tools from their cargo. The Council's initial assessment came back with the classification: clever but dangerously unpredictable. It was like watching an infant somehow get hold of a plasma torch. You're simultaneously impressed by the ingenuity and terrified by the inevitable consequences. The older species started treating humanity like fascinating toys that might suddenly explode if you pressed the wrong button. They established containment protocols, assigned observation teams, and generally made sure to keep a safe distance during galactic events. The tension wasn't about hostility, which was the strange part. Humans were oddly friendly in their chaotic way. They'd show up uninvited to formal events wearing what they considered formal attire, attempt to shake appendages that weren't designed for shaking, and offer food items that might be toxic to half the room. The problem was their complete disregard for established norms. They treated centuries of diplomatic tradition like mildly interesting suggestions. This institutional caution created a standing policy of observation rather than collaboration. Ambassadors would nod politely at their human counterparts while maintaining what the guidelines called appropriate safety distance. Everyone was waiting to see when the other shoe would drop, when humanity's unpredictable nature would finally cause the disaster everyone anticipated. That theoretical fear was about to become painfully personal for one human student, delivered through the most unlikely venue imaginable, a university lecture hall, which, of course, brings us directly to Professor Zilthak's classroom, where academic theory was about to collide with lived experience in the most awkward way possible. Imagine walking into what you think is just another required course, another credit to check off your degree plan, only to realize your entire species is about to become a public case study. That's precisely what Danny Fletcher stepped into with Professor Zilthak's interspecies conflict theory. The class had a reputation, and not the good kind. It was known across the university as the one lecture where you either left enlightened or deeply unsettled, depending on which side of the historical projector you happened to be on. Professor Zilthak, a Vorak scholar with 4 precisely coordinated arms, ran his classroom like a clinical observation deck. His voice had this dry, rasping quality like stones grinding together, and he used it to dissect the most violent chapters of galactic history without a hint of emotion. While his upper arms manipulated the holographic projectors, the lower ones would cross behind his back, a picture of detached academic rigor. The content itself was deliberately provocative. He didn't just teach, he performed a kind of scholarly autopsy on civilizations. The projector cycled through brutal conflicts from a dozen worlds, the ritualistic blood wars of the Caraxians, the atmospheric poison campaigns of the Gellian Flux, the orbital bombardment of New Thessia. Each event was stripped of its cultural context and presented as a series of tactical decisions and casualty reports. Students from those species would sit stiffly, their feathers flattening, or their chitin plates clicking quietly in discomfort, forced to watch their own historical shames framed as primitive barbarism. There was no judgment in Zilthak's tone, and that was the most unsettling part. He delivered analysis on genocide and mass mobilization, with the same flat inflection one might use to describe mineral deposits on an uninhabited moon. The classroom became a theater of collective discomfort, a place where young beings were forced to confront the violent impulses buried in their own ancestral pasts. It was intellectual, it was rigorous, and it was deeply, profoundly personal for everyone whose homeworld flashed across that screen. This academic setting, designed to provoke and unsettle in the name of higher learning, was about to become the stage for humanity's most damning public trial. The lecture was building, moving chronologically through the galaxy's history of conflict, and the logical next chapter was clear to everyone in the room. The primitive warfare unit was concluding. The projector flickered, the hum of its generators shifting frequency. Then Professor Zilthak turned his unblinking gaze toward the section of the lecture hall where the lone human student was trying to look very small, and the projection system began pulling data on Earth's military history. You know what it's like when your species' darkest hour becomes somebody else's academic case study? That's exactly what happened when Zilthak's presentation shifted to Earth during what they called the Second World War. The holographic display filled with grainy footage of trench warfare, burning cities, and waves of soldiers charging across open ground into artillery fire. The professor's dry voice provided clinical commentary as the images unfolded, his forearms making precise gestures to highlight tactical formations and defensive positions. He framed humanity as this bizarre anomaly, species that had developed advanced technology while clinging to primitive combat methods. While other civilizations had moved beyond mass infantry engagements once they achieved spaceflight, humans apparently decided to perfect them instead. Zilthak highlighted their continued reliance on combined arms tactics, long after most species considered such approaches obsolete. He showed how they coordinated infantry, artillery, and early aircraft in ways that maximized casualties on both sides. The numbers flashed across the screen, casualty counts that made several students visibly uncomfortable. A Gellion in the front row actually folded her sensory frills in distress. A Caraxian's scales flushed darker as the statistics mounted. Zilthak didn't emphasize the horror, though. He emphasized the stubbornness, the refusal to evolve beyond what he termed tactical brutalism. He compared human warfare development to finding a species that invented quantum computing while still using stone tools for construction. Danny could feel the atmosphere in the room shifting. The occasional glances toward him became more frequent, more lingering. Where before his human identity had been merely curious, it was now becoming problematic. His classmates weren't just learning about human history, they were learning to see him as a representative of that history. The academic analysis felt less like education and more like public shaming, a detailed catalog of his species' apparent failures to evolve beyond violence. The galaxy's perception of humanity solidified in that lecture hall through this selective examination. By focusing exclusively on humanity's most destructive periods while ignoring its cultural achievements, Zilthak created a devastating portrait. He presented humans as a species trapped in permanent adolescence, technologically gifted but morally stunted. The other students saw the casualty figures, the destruction, the apparent joy some soldiers took in combat, all presented without the context of ideology, survival, or the complex moral landscape of those conflicts. When the segment ended, humanity had officially become the galaxy's prime example of primitive warfare in modern times. The label stuck because it fit the narrative the established powers wanted to believe, that humans were dangerous precisely because they refused to grow up, to adopt the civilized conventions of warfare that other species had embraced. It was clean, simple, and devastatingly effective at reinforcing the existing policy of cautious containment. Danny sat there, surrounded by beings who now saw him not as a fellow student but as a living example of everything their cultures had worked to move beyond. The silence in the room was heavier than any gravity well. What happens when humans encounter a problem that supposedly can't be solved? They don't try harder, they change the question entirely. The Proxima Centauri engagement started as one of those routine reconnaissance missions that every fledgling spacefaring civilization runs along disputed borders. Standard procedure, really. A human scout group was mapping the periphery when they detected what they interpreted as a distress signal from Allied vessels. Turned out it was just a hegemony fleet running communication drills, but by the time anyone realized the mistake, the situation had already escalated beyond retrieval. Instead of retreating as every galactic protocol dictated, Colonel Fletcher's task force executed what they called an aggressive penetration maneuver. Zilthak's analysis showed the tactical display with clinical precision, human vessels bypassing the main combat units entirely, ignoring the frontline fighters that outnumbered them 3-1. They went straight for the support ships, the command vessels, the logistics carriers. It was like watching someone dismantle a machine by removing all the screws instead of trying to break the main frame. This approach, attacking the enemy's ability to fight rather than the fighters themselves, made numerical superiority completely irrelevant. The hegemony had more ships, better weapons, superior positioning. None of it mattered when their command structure dissolved and their supply lines evaporated. The engagement lasted 47 minutes from first contact to complete enemy incapacitation. 0 human casualties. Total hegemony combat ineffective status. Galactic observers weren't horrified by the violence itself. Space combat had seen far bloodier engagements. What unsettled them was the tactical creativity, the way humans treated warfare like a puzzle to be solved rather than a contest to be won. They violated conventions that species had followed for centuries, not out of recklessness but because those conventions didn't fit their problem-solving methodology. It was like watching someone use a wrench to hammer nails. Unconventional, slightly disturbing, but undeniably effective. The incident became the foundational case study for why the galaxy developed such conflicting feelings about humanity. On one hand, they represented everything galactic civilization had tried to move beyond. That raw, unpredictable problem-solving that treated rules as suggestions. On the other, they demonstrated an effectiveness that more civilized species couldn't match. They were the solution you called when every conventional approach had failed, and the problem you dreaded having to solve yourself. This engagement established the pattern that would define human military interactions for decades. They didn't fight to prove strength or claim territory. They fought to solve the problem of being fought against. It was a distinction that sounded semantic until you saw it in practice, until you watched a numerically inferior force dismantle a superior opponent, not through bravery or sacrifice, but through better puzzle solving. The galaxy learned that day that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology or their courage, it was their refusal to accept that any problem had only one solution. The Proxima incident wasn't some bizarre outlier in the galactic record. It was the latest example of a pattern that stretched back 4,000 years. Professor Zilthak's hollow timeline displayed human military engagements from ancient battlefields to modern space conflicts, each icon marking another instance of numerically inferior forces defeating opponents who should have crushed them. Marathon, Cannae, Armstrong Station. The names changed, but the underlying principle remained stubbornly consistent. Humans won not by matching strength with strength, but by redefining the terms of the conflict entirely. What made this pattern so unsettling wasn't the victories themselves. Plenty of species had won against bad odds. It was how they did it. Human military doctrine emphasized what they called scenario-based problem-solving under extreme stress. Their soldiers trained in deliberately impossible situations designed to break conventional thinking patterns. They'd drop recruits into simulated combat with faulty equipment, incorrect intelligence, or absurd objectives, not to teach them how to follow orders, but to force them to come up with answers the manual didn't contain. This created a military culture that valued adaptability over discipline, creativity over tradition. Where other species developed elaborate rituals and strict hierarchies, humans built forces that could reorganize on the fly, change tactics mid-engagement, and treat unexpected obstacles as opportunities rather than setbacks. Their command structure was notoriously flat for a spacefaring civilization. Junior officers made decisions that would require flag rank approval in other fleets. You could see this philosophy baked into their ship designs. Modern Terran vessels placed minimal emphasis on crew comfort and maximum investment in weaponization and multi-role capability. Human warships looked like someone had taken 3 different classes of vessel and welded them together into something that could fight, repair, and reconfigure on the move. They slept in cramped quarters, ate recycled nutrients, and stored spare parts where other species would put diplomatic lounges, all to maximize operational flexibility. This historical context explained why 17 documented galactic conflicts had produced such lopsided results in humanity's favor. They weren't winning because they were stronger or more advanced. Often they were neither. They won because they treated warfare as an engineering problem rather than a contest of honor. An enemy's numerical advantage became a logistics challenge to solve. Superior positioning became a puzzle to circumvent. Even their own technological limitations became opportunities to innovate rather than excuses to surrender. The galaxy had spent centuries perfecting the art of war. According to established principles, decisive engagement, force concentration, tactical doctrine, humanity looked at those principles and saw suggestions. They didn't break the rules so much as they played an entirely different game, one where victory meant making the opponent's advantages irrelevant rather than overcoming them through brute force. It was like watching someone win a chess match by redesigning the board mid-game. Effective, but deeply unsettling to everyone who believed in following the established rules. This 4,000-year pattern of creative destruction explained why the galaxy viewed humans with such uneasy fascination. They weren't just another species with impressive military records. They were a fundamental challenge to how interstellar conflict was supposed to work. Every engagement they fought reinforced the same terrifying lesson. Given enough time and motivation, humans would find a way to turn any disadvantage into a strength, any obstacle into an opportunity. It was why admirals studied their tactics and diplomats kept antacids handy during negotiations. You never knew when humanity would decide to solve the problem of your existence. Sometimes statistics tell a more terrifying story than any battle footage ever could. Professor Zilthak switched his holoprojector from tactical displays to raw data streams, the cold numbers hanging in the air like verdicts. He presented the complete data set from humanity's 17 documented interstellar conflicts since first contact, and the patterns that emerged were enough to make any strategic planner reconsider their career choices. In 12 of those engagements, human forces had been significantly outnumbered, sometimes by margins that should have made victory mathematically impossible according to standard fleet combat models. Yet they achieved decisive victories every time. The average casualty ratio showed 1 human loss for every 47 enemy casualties across all conflicts. That number wasn't just impressive, it was statistically anomalous. The kind of outlier that makes academic review boards demand to see the raw data collection methods. Even more telling was the engagement duration. The average space combat among galactic powers typically lasts days, sometimes weeks, as fleets maneuver for position and probe for weaknesses. Human engagements averaged 4 hours and 37 minutes. They didn't waste time with positioning or feints. They identified the problem and solved it with brutal efficiency. It was like watching someone complete a complex puzzle while everyone else was still reading the instructions. These numbers suggested an efficiency that bordered on predictability in its consistency. Human forces weren't just winning. They were winning according to a calculable pattern that made them quantifiably dangerous. Zilthak noted that their casualty ratios improved dramatically when they initiated combat rather than responding to attacks. When given operational freedom instead of reactive constraints, their effectiveness increased by measurable percentages. This indicated that human tactical creativity worked best when they could define the problem on their own terms rather than working within someone else's framework. The implications were clear to everyone in that lecture hall. Opposing human forces militarily wasn't just strategically questionable, it was mathematically inadvisable. Their consistency in overcoming numerical disadvantages suggested that adding more ships to the opposition might actually improve human combat efficiency rather than diminish it. It was like trying to stop a flood by adding more water. The problem just got better at being a problem. This data analysis led directly to the current galactic policy regarding human military engagement. The official stance became strikingly simple: avoid combat with human forces whenever possible. If engagement became unavoidable, the contingency protocols recommended immediate unconditional surrender, followed by generous offers of reparations. The numbers didn't lie. Prolonged resistance only improved human performance metrics while increasing your own losses. Better to end the conflict quickly and hope their terms were reasonable. The classroom fell into that particular silence that happens when theoretical principles collide with practical reality. These weren't just academic concepts anymore. They were survival guidelines. Every student in that room represented a species that might someday face the choice between fighting humans or finding another solution. The data suggested that choosing fight was the statistical equivalent of volunteering to be a case study in someone else's victory report. Zilthak let the numbers hang in the air a moment longer than necessary, allowing the implications to settle. Then he moved to the next slide without commentary. The lesson was clear enough without additional explanation. When the facts tell you that losing is the most likely outcome, the smart move is to find a game where the odds work in your favor, and nobody played against humanity anymore. Then came the incident that transformed fear into outright awe. You know how most species respond to overwhelming odds? They follow protocol, wait for reinforcements, maintain defensive positions. Humans look at an impossible situation and see a puzzle missing just one piece. Captain Elizabeth Hawthorne's frigate was running routine patrol when the distress call came through from Vega 7 Research Station. Standard procedure would have been to establish perimeter surveillance and await backup. 400 scientists would have been dead before reinforcements could possibly arrive. Hawthorne arrived to find the station swarming with hegemony raiders, superior numbers, better positioning, all the advantages that should have made assault impossible. Instead of following the rulebook, she looked at her emergency supply pods and saw something else entirely. She had her crew fill them with whatever explosive or reactive compounds they had on board. Cleaning solvents, fuel additives, even some medical supplies that become unstable under certain conditions. It was the kind of improvisation that would give a safety inspector night terrors. She didn't aim for the raiders themselves. That would have been conventional thinking. She targeted the station's external defense systems and power regulators with her makeshift bomb pods. The resulting explosions disabled weapons and primary systems without breaching the inhabited sections. It was like performing brain surgery with demolition charges, the kind of approach that shouldn't work but somehow did when humans attempted. Yet her Marine contingent docked during the confusion and extracted every single scientist within 27 minutes of arrival. The raiders were either incapacitated or captured without a single human or researcher lost in the operation. It wasn't a battle. It was a solution implemented with brutal efficiency. The hegemony never understood what hit them, because they were waiting for a military engagement while the humans were solving an extraction problem. This mission became the definitive case study in human tactical innovation. They hadn't won through superior firepower or numbers. They'd won by redefining the parameters of success. Where other species saw an unwinnable combat scenario, humans saw a rescue operation with some obstacles to circumvent. Their solution was messy, unorthodox, and violated half a dozen safety regulations. But it worked perfectly. The galaxy's military analysts spent months picking apart the Vega 7 incident. They ran simulations, conducted after-action reviews, 试图复制结果. Every time they followed standard protocols, they got standard failures. Only when they attempted to mimic human improvisation did they achieve similar results, though never with the same flawless execution. There's a difference between theoretical creativity and actually jettisoning explosive supply pods at an occupied space station based on a hunch. This incident shifted the galactic perception of humanity from dangerously unpredictable to terrifyingly effective. The same qualities that made them worrying as adversaries made them invaluable as allies. Suddenly, species that had been keeping their distance started wondering if maybe having humans on your side was better than following centuries of proven tactical doctrine. The Vega 7 miracle demonstrated that sometimes the most dangerous solution is also the only one that actually works.